I think what we look for in a major actor, they were all full of the life force. They enjoy breathing. They enjoy even their pain. It's a kind of participation in the joy of life. It's the ones who don't quite achieve that aren't the stars, that aren't the significant actors. We go to the theater to stay alive, finally, to celebrate life. I remember Lee Cobb, who was the original Willie. I didn't know Lee when Kazan cast him. And when I met him, he was this big, fat, lugubrious fellow. And I had imagined the character to be a little guy full of ginger, one of those little salesmen who more or less like a squirrel. And here was Lee looking like a big beef. And he came to my house once before we cast him because he was desperate to do the part. And my son Bobby was a little boy playing on the floor. And at one point, Lee looked down, and Bobby had done something funny. And he laughed, Lee did. And in that, it was a real hearty laugh. And you wanted to just burst out crying. Because it was so filled with sadness. And he was very funny. He could be very funny. But while he was being funny, he was dying in front of you. And I knew that was Willie. I had wanted to be a writer in a general, vague way. I wasn't particularly expecting to become a playwright at that point. I was trying to write stories unsuccessfully. But when I got here, I hadn't seen any plays to speak of, maybe 2 or 3 plays in my life. And however, they had an active department of play production. And I would sit out there and watch some of the shows, and I got to know a couple of the people that were interested in that kind of thing. And there was another reason, I think, that I turned to playwriting, and that was that in the 30s, the theater in New York was exploding. For the first time, probably in its history, it was beginning to reflect real life, which was the Depression. That's when Orson Welles was starting to perk up, and a number of very, very good actors, mainly actors, and a few writers like Clifford Odets, who were leading the general feeling that something had to change, because the country was slowly starving. People were being thrown out of their homes, as you know the whole story, and losing their farms and the rest of it. And the standard theater at the time was a very conventional entertainment theater, which is what it usually is and is now for the most part. And it hardly reflected anything but show business. And was of no interest to me or anybody I knew. And these small radical groups of actors were putting on plays in storefronts and other garages and places like that. And you gave them, when you entered, you made a contribution of 10 cents or a quarter. And they were reflecting the new radical outcry against the situation of the country. And that was exciting. So writing plays seemed to be the best way to confront the audience, to speak what one was feeling, more so than prose, which seemed to be remote and distant in comparison. You know, what the Depression was a crash of accepted values. For probably a half a century before that, one could say there was a stable set of values in the United States as well as in Europe. And when that was overturned and nothing that had been true was any longer true, you got the feeling that you were living in a very conditional world, which could be swept aside in 10 minutes, so that you were forced to look for deeper values than were on the surface, because the surface values were going to go at any time. And I think that's what the Depression meant to me, as well as to a lot of other people. Of course, the fathers are the carriers of the past. Their fathers are the authority, or were. And consequently, the struggle with the father becomes a struggle with the society. And it's reflected in my work a good deal, or in my earlier work anyway. I generally work because I am struck by something somebody has said. Usually, playwriting is an oral art. It's not an art of a writer expecting to be read. He's the writer expecting to be heard. And so I think that if I hear a character speaking, either one I've invented or one I've confronted, it can start a process of creating which I can't control or even describe properly. If I could describe it, I probably wouldn't do it. I tend to write maybe the opening 25 pages of something and then forget it for a couple of years, and then come back and go on with it. What you read on the page looks like it's been there forever, but believe me, it hasn't. It's always a struggle to find what you are looking for. And certainly the theater, the play is as much rewritten as it is written. The culture of the United States has flooded the world. It's the inevitable result of a powerful culture, ours, of a popular. We've got an instinctive touch when it comes to the popular mind, because we have had no aristocracy. It is a democratic country. And we know without knowing it, without bothering to understand it, how to reach ordinary people, sometimes with the most vulgar, worthless junk on the face of the earth. But we know how to do it. And this has garnered a lot of resentment over the years. At the same time, that it is also imitated. So it's a very complicated affair. I've had battles of my own with the culture. For one thing, I don't think that the theater is necessarily only about entertainment. I think it's entertainment that reaches the soul, the spirit. I don't think people there are very few instances where a work of literature or art or drama or anything has actually changed the behavior of people directly. It's a very rare, unusual thing. All you can hope for, I think, and all you try to do is illuminate something so that people can make up their own minds based upon the reality of the situation rather than the mythology. And if one can do that, it's enough. Well, I have always felt that the plays that, the works that last, whether they be plays or fiction, of course, the works that address the condition of mankind at any one time. They're not simply private, emotional works that deal simply with the relationship between private people. They somehow echo the condition of the whole nation or of the world. And that goes for anybody from Tolstoy to Dostoevsky to Thackeray to anybody. The aberration is the theater and the fiction that has nothing to do with anything. That's a new invention.
Yeah, yeah.
The original purpose or color of creative art was always the community. Whether we can hope to ever have a theater based upon the art that is at the same time reasonably popular so that it has a sizable audience. I don't know the answer to that at this point. There is no, I think the theater now is struggling with the television and film. People go into the theater now hoping that they'll get out of it and go into movies, because that's where you can make a killing and that's where you can become famous. And the idea of developing actors, writers, who want to be actors and writers for the theater is, I think, diminished a great deal. And it's a question, really, whether we can continue to create new plays and new productions and new actors and so on with next to no public support. You know, every theater we look back on with any respect was a subsidized theater, starting with the Greeks and Shakespeare and Ibsen and the rest of them. The idea of a private theater for profit is a very recent idea. I wonder sometimes whether its future is questionable in relation to its competition with these other media. A decision would have to be made by the society that they want this to happen, that they feel there is a value here which is transcends profit and loss. The theater has been, I see it as being very involved in life, but it's a glancing blow. We're not taking up issues so much as just dealing with personal feeling, I think.
Yeah.
I think if, in the long view, which I'm burdened with, things have gotten better. That doesn't mean they're good, but it's gotten better. But I have a sense that our literature is more and more filled with socially relevant work than it was years back. Mm-hmm. I think we're on a good track.
Yeah.
In that respect. The escapist notion is always there. People want to get out of their troubles and they'll read some story that takes them away from life. And that's okay. But there's been a lot of literature in the last years that I think is relevant. But there's a long way to go because we have come a long way with the wrong feelings. And to live down those feelings or integrate them into our hearts and change them is not the work of a day or of a generation, but of many generations. The only good thing I can say about it is that as crazy as this country is, and it certainly is, it's got a chance because of the craziness, because we're not definitely locked in by law to one course of action. We're capable of learning under this system, and that's a great hope.